Hello everyone and welcome to Winshuttle Transaction Basic Training. I am Miia from ADSOTECH, your Winshuttle partner in the Nordics, and I'm here to guide you through our three training packages, Basic, Advanced 1 and Advanced 2. These packages are designed for new Winshuttle transaction users with a developer license. The Complete Basics package includes creating your first script, problem investigation, and the different recording modes. This is the first part of that package, concentrating on how to create your first script. Let's dive in. I would like to get us started by taking a look at a couple of things in the settings department. Well, first of all, the interface. Over here we have the main screen of Winshuttle Transaction. Up top we have two big buttons, New and Open. And then on the bottom, as you use the tool more, you will get a list of recent scripts. And you might also want to mark some of your scripts as favorites, and those will be also listed here. But for the settings department, if you go under Tools, Options and Application Defaults, you will see two very important file paths. One path for your Excel files and one path for your script files. There's no need to change these settings if you don't want to, but it's quite important that you know where your new files will go to by default. And I do advocate that you use these folders as well. So if you want to use different folders than the ones that are listed here for you originally, then you should change the paths here. I do advocate for using one central place for all of your Excel and script files. It makes it a lot easier for you later on when you have created several scripts and several Excel files, and then you need to look for one of the older ones. Then you know exactly where it should be found. Another setting that I would like you to be aware of, again, Tools, Options, and now SAP Defaults. There's a tick box that says Remember Last Logon Password. By default, the tick box is off, but most people like to have it on. When it's on, Winshuttle Transaction remembers your last SAP password as long as your Winshuttle session is still open. So whenever you open a new Winshuttle session, you need to type in your SAP password once, but after that, Winshuttle remembers it until you close Winshuttle completely. Very useful option when you do a lot of testing, a lot of runs consecutively. Just keep repeating, running and running a script. It gets really annoying to keep writing down your SAP password. So with this option, you can avoid the typing and retype your password all the time. All right, then how to create your first transaction script. Our example is a very simple recording of T-code MM02 in SAP. We're just going to update some very basic data fields and simply go through all of the script creation steps that we have in Winshuttle Transactions, so recording, mapping, and running. Before you start recording a new script, you should know your transaction in SAP. So rehearse the steps in SAP if you are unsure of the things that you are going to do in SAP. Also know your data. So in this case, know what material to use and what data to put onto that material. You can also go to Winshuttle's support side and check for any kind of tips and tricks for this particular transaction to be recorded. So our first step is going to be to create a recording. We'll take in connection to SAP. We're going to walk through the SAP transaction to update a couple of fields and finally save the data in SAP. From Winshuttle Transaction window, we first click the New button up top. After that, we are asked for our transaction code, MM02 in this case. Also over in this window, we can clearly see the three main steps that we need to go through in order to create a completely new script. We have record on the left, in the middle we have map, and then run on the far right. For now, we'll stick to recording because that needs to be done first. So we give transaction code MM02 and click Go. After that, we need to decide on an SAP system. So pick a quality system, a test system, where you can actually play around easily. Pick that system from the list. If that's your main test or quality system, then you can even select it as your default system. So tick on the tick box below, and then of course click OK. You'll be asked to give your SAP credentials for that system. When you log in the first time for any system, you need to give the client number and then use your username and password, of course. Language is not necessary, it's not mandatory. you can also give that if you want to. There's one more pop-up window before we actually get to the SAP window. You are asked for the recording mode that you want to use with this particular script. You have three main options: batch input mode, non-batch input mode, and GUI scripting. Some Winshuttle versions also give you a fourth option, which is called function module. It suffices to say right now that that's essentially the same as non-batch input mode, but with a certain basis level, it is better to use the function module mode rather than the non-batch input mode. But the basis level should be given in the material later. So for now, we're not going to go into the differences between the recording modes either. So what we're simply going to do is we're going to stick with the recording mode that the system is suggesting us. In this case, non-batch input mode without SAP controls. On the bottom part here in this window, we also have some fields to fill in. Title is the only one that's mandatory. It's marked with a star right there. But that's also pre-filled for you. I do suggest that you change the title to something more descriptive, but it is filled out, so you don't have to if you don't want to. Some free text there as well, purpose of creation, comments that you can use if you want to. There's a possibility to lock your script with a password as well. Not many people use that, but it's a possibility. When you're happy with your choices and your free texting there, simply click Next. What you will then see is an SAP window, and you are directly brought to the initial screen of your SAP transaction. In this case, the initial screen of MM02. From here on out, the idea is to simply use SAP as you are used to using it. So you give your material number, hit enter or the green tick on the upper left-hand side corner to move on to the next screen. Over in the next screen, we actually have the first consideration where we might want to do something different compared to what we are actually used to doing in SAP. There are a few of this type of considerations that we have to make. Since we are not just using SAP, we're actually trying to record a script, trying to create something that we can keep repeating any number of times. The consideration here is that we only want to select one view, and that usually the best choice here is Basic Data 1. Basic Data 1 is usually pretty much always the top choice here. It's the first one in the list, and its placement in the list does not change from material to material. So it's a safe bet. It's always in the same place. Some of the other ones might change. I mean, sales text or plant stock, it might be the 5th row, or it might be the 7th row, it might be the 10th row, and so on, depending on the material and which views actually exist for that material. So the list changes. So almost always our best bet here is to simply select Basic Data 1, regardless of the fact if you want to actually change data in Basic Data 1 or if you want to navigate to different views altogether. So that doesn't really matter. We should deselect all other selections that we might have pre-selected. Only select Basic Data 1 and then move on. In our example, we actually want to do something in Basic Data 1 as well. So we're going to use fields from this view. If the case was that you don't need to do any changes in Basic Data 1, you would simply see the screen and then you would navigate to the view of your choosing. What we do over in these screens is that we simply put our cursor into those fields that we want to have in our script. In this case, the ones marked with red. So the description field, base unit of measure, gross and net weight, and the weight unit as well. When I say that we put our cursor in those fields, we also need to use our keyboard in one way or another. It's not necessary to change the actual value in the field. So for base unit of measure, I could put my cursor there and, for instance, retype kg for kilograms. But I need to use my keyboard in some way so that the system recognizes that this is a field that I actually want to have in my script. Same thing applies to gross weight, net weight, weight unit, and so on. So I can put my cursor in the field. I can, at the end of the actual value there, I can hit space and backspace. Doesn't change the value, but I have used my keyboard in that field. Or I can simply just change the value as well. So instead of net weight 250, I could just put net weight as 251. When I'm ready to navigate to a different tab or to a different view, we usually recommend it to be done through this drop-down list that you see here. Very, very often this drop-down list is an option, and it's the best option that you have for the navigation. So simply open the drop-down list and select the view that you want to go to. In our case right now, Basic Data 2. If it should happen that this drop-down list is not available for you, then it means that you don't have that many views or tabs to select from. You only have 2, 3, maybe 4 tabs right there, and then you don't have the drop-down list. You can simply click on the headline of the tab right there as you see them. Basic Data 1, Basic Data 2, Sales Org 1, and so on. But whenever you have the possibility of using this drop-down list, then I strongly advocate for using it. So from the drop-down list, we select Basic Data 2, and then we are here. Over here, in our example, we simply want to update basic material. Over here, we have this extra pop-up here on the top, and what we're trying to show here is that we can actually use the search functionalities for each field as well while recording. I said before that you should know your data beforehand before you start recording, but technically it is possible to search for the correct value as well during recording. You should not definitely do it for all of your fields, but you can do it for some. So you put your cursor in the basic material in this case, and then you click on the small white search button that you get at the end of that field. And in the case of basic material, what you get then is this pop-up that you see here, a list of valid values for this basic material field. In some other field, you might actually get a search window where you can give criteria and actually search for the correct value, but that completely depends on the actual SAP field that you're doing this for. From this list of valid values, I can simply select my value, stainless steel in this case, and move on. After that, in our example, I'm ready to get out of SAP. So basically save my data and finish my recording. I could go to the save button directly and save my data, but I do suggest that in MM02 you do your exit like this. At least if you have changed one value somewhere in the transaction. Then click on back first, and then you get prompted to save. The system is asking me if I want to save my data, and of course I want to save, so I click yes. Without going too deeply into why I advocate for using this method of exiting, let's just say that there's a feature or two in Winshuttle transaction that prefer to have an extra step here in the end of our script. So not simply updating the fields and then pressing save immediately, but some features that want us to do an extra step before saving. And in this case, in MM02, this is a good extra step. Very simple, doesn't take up time, but gets the job done. So click back and then click yes. Now, when I click yes for the saving, the SAP window will close down automatically, and then I will be brought back to my Winshuttle window. Depending on the script that you have just created, big and massive it is, how much data needs to be processed, it might take 1 second or it might take 10 seconds or whatever for the control to be back with Winshuttle transaction window. So if it seems to be taking a long time, just be patient. Usually it doesn't, it's a matter of seconds, but if you have made a very, very long and massive script, then it will take longer. If you don't do anything with your computer at this point, then the Winshuttle window will simply pop up automatically as soon as it's ready for you to continue the process. So what we see right now is that recording is done. Your recording was completed successfully. And then mapping is not yet done, but that's our next step. And then running is waiting for us on the far right. So we want to do the mapping next. So we're going to tell the system which Excel columns will contain what SAP field data. This is a simple drag and drop thing, so nothing fancy about that. And after we have done our drag and drop, we will simply save the script and the new Excel template that we created. So we're here. We have two options there in the mapping phase, either create mapping or auto mapping. Auto mapping can be a very quick and easy way of getting a mapping done and just moving ahead to the testing phase. Just getting to run your script and test it. But the problem with auto mapping is that you don't really have control over where in Excel your data will be. As a control freak myself, I want to have full control over the placement of data in my Excel file. So I will always click Create Mapping. And when you get used to doing the mapping by hand, manually dragging and dropping, it actually doesn't take up almost any of your time. So I like Create Mapping much better myself. Let's click that. When you get to this mapper window or mapping phase, up top, first of all, you have two tabs that you can choose from. We will stick with the basic tab for now because that's the easiest option. Over in the expert tab, you see much more of your script and much more of the options, and you can add different functionalities to your script. But for right now, we're not going to go through that. We're simply going to do our drag and drop and be happy with that. So what we see here in the basic tab is first of all the SAP fields that we have recorded. So over here we have a list of the SAP fields. For each field we have a field description, the technical name of that field in SAP. We also see a mapping type, which is only a red pen icon right now. But that's something that we're going to change. And then lastly, we have the value that we entered or used when we did the recording. So an actual value for that SAP field. There's also a section for free text notes if you want to make any. On the bottom part of your mapper, you will see an empty Excel file. It actually says untitled right there for the name of the Excel file. So it's a brand new Excel file. It doesn't have a name. It's not saved anywhere. It's just a completely new Excel file. For now, we're going to do our mapping against this brand new empty Excel file because we actually want to create a new Excel file while we at the same time as we create a new script. But if you already had an existing Excel file that you wanted to use for this script, there is an open button here just above the Excel columns. By clicking that open button, you will get to a file directory and you can simply find the Excel file that you want to use for this particular script. And then you can do your dragging and dropping against that existing Excel file. So you don't have to create a brand new Excel file if you don't want to. But for the dragging and dropping then, so it's as simple as deciding that I want to have my material number in column A in Excel. I will drag from column A to material number. And yes, the direction of the drag and drop is very important. I just said that I will drag from column A in Excel to material number. I will do it in that direction because I want the data to go from Excel to SAP. That's the direction we're focusing on right now. There is a possibility of using Winshuttle transaction to get data going in the other direction as well. So I would get data from SAP to Excel. But that's not what I'm looking for right now. So I want to drag and drop from Excel to SAP. So like this. So put my cursor somewhere in column A. It doesn't matter which cell in column A, just one of the cells. That's fine. Put your mouse button down and drag to material number. Again, almost anywhere on that row of material number, and then release. and this is what you should see. So on the material number row, the SAP field row, you should see the mapping type change. It's not a red pin anymore. It's giving you icons that represent Excel and SAP, and there's an arrow pointing from Excel to SAP. You also see a change in the value column there. The value is now saying A. That's actually referring to Excel column A. So the value is going to be taken from Excel column A and it will be put to SAP. On the Excel side, since this is a completely new untitled Excel file, we see a change there as well. Automatically, Winshuttle will give us a headline for our column. So it gives the field description and the technical field name as well, on a light blue background, to tell us that we have dragged it from Excel to SAP. And of course, there's also the value for that SAP fields, so the value that we used when recording. That's on row 2 in Excel. Whenever I talk about these default headlines that Winshuttle creates for us, I need to mention also that you can change these headlines to whatever you want. So later on when we go to Excel, you can just change the headings, you can change the coloring, you can change it to whatever you want. If you want to use some other headlines, not the Winshuttle default ones, that's fine. Winshuttle doesn't need these particular headlines in order to work. It's just for us to know what data we have in each column. But you can change them manually to whatever you want later on in Excel. Okay, the dragging and dropping, of course, we need to do it for the other fields as well. Actually, we need to do it for all the fields that we want to be able to change the values for. So in this case, we have now done it for material description, base unit of measure, weight unit, gross weight, and net weight, and also the basic material. These are actually all the actual changeable fields that we recorded. So we want all of them to be available for us in our Excel template. So we can actually change the values to whatever we want. There is one SAP field here highlighted, and that's row 3, checkbox. We haven't done any dragging and dropping for this particular checkbox because this checkbox actually refers to the selection of view that we had there in the quite beginning of our MM02 transaction. And why we don't want to do any dragging or dropping for this particular checkbox, it's because we always want the script to do the exact same selection. We always want it to select basic data 1. So we will leave it as a fixed value. So we don't do any dragging or dropping for it. The same thing would apply if we wanted, for instance, weight unit to always be kilograms. Then we don't have to drag and drop it from Excel. We don't need to actually see weight unit in Excel if we always want weight unit to be kilograms for each and every material. We can simply put a fixed value of kilograms into the script and then not see weight unit in Excel at all. In that case, I mean, if we had not dragged and dropped anything yet, or at least we had not dragged and dropped weight unit, we would simply leave it as a fixed value. So the red pin would still be there in the mapping type. We would just make sure that the value field, the value column there for weight unit, then says kilograms, so kg. As long as the mapping type over there gives the icon red pin, it means that it's a fixed value upload, and the actual value given there in the value column will be the value that goes into SAP every single time. The easiest way to accomplish that is simply to not drag and drop at all, not to drag and drop that field at all. Leave it as the red pin, because that's what all of these are by default when we have just finished our recording. And then check that the value given in the value field is the correct one. And if it needs to be changed, try double clicking the value and changing it to whatever it needs to be. When you're ready with your mapping, so with your dragging and dropping, click on the Close Mapping button there on the top left hand corner of your screen. So it's the blue arrow pointing to your left. When you click it, you'll be asked to save your files. First, it's asking you to save your Excel file, so it's talking about a preview. That's the preview to your Excel file. In this case, we don't even have a name for our Excel file yet, so it's asking us to save it. Of course, we say yes, we want to save, and then we just give the file a name, a descriptive name. There's no need to start navigating through your file directory and looking for the correct folder, because what Winshuttle does, it automatically opens your default folder for your Excel files. So all you have to do is give a file name. Make the file name descriptive in one way or another. Maybe your company even has a naming convention, so use that and click Save. Then, if your script has not been saved yet, Winshuttle will ask you to save that too. Over here, same thing applies. No need to start navigating through your file directory, because Winshuttle opens up your default folder automatically. Again, just give the file a name. And our recommendation is to give the same file name to both files, so that the Excel file and the script file have the exact same name. Of course, the extension will be different, but from the same name, you will know which two actually go together. And then later on, maybe a month from now, it's easier to find the correct files. Now you are finished with your mapping. You will see on the left side here that transaction script has been mapped. And you have a link that says Update Mapping. So if you need to go back to your mapping, add functionality, or change some of your drag and drop, you can simply click on Update Mapping and redo the mapping steps. Otherwise, most of the screen here is reserved for the running portion of our process. Whenever we start running a script, we first need to check and prepare our Excel data. Then we can actually run the script. If we have just created the script, then of course our first runs should be done in a test system, so in a testing environment in SAP. And once we're happy with our testing, then we can start using it in a production SAP environment. So first, to open our Excel file. In our Run window, you will see the path to your Excel file there. Select Data File. Right next to that, you have a couple of buttons. There's a magnifying glass button, which is for those cases where you actually need to change your Excel file for some reason. I mean, change the actual Excel file to a different Excel file. Then you use the magnifying glass. But normally you don't have to do that. You will need the following button, which is the Excel file button. Click that and your Excel file will open automatically. So again, no need to go through your file directory to look for the Excel file. We have a quick link here to open that Excel file. When you have your Excel file open, you need to input some test data. Or if this was a an older script that has already been tested, then of course you need to input actual production data. We're still in the testing phase, so we will have some testing data right here. So maybe add a couple of material numbers and some descriptions and weights and things like that for those materials. There's no need to have very many rows of data here. Enough to have 3 or 4 rows of data, just fine. And once you have the data typed in, save your Excel file. I do advocate for saving at this point. It's not technically mandatory. So even if you don't save it and you leave it open, Winshuttle will still access the data that's in the open Excel file. But you never know when your computer might crash or something else like that might happen. So I always advocate for saving your Excel file after you have typed in some data. So save the Excel file. You can still leave your Excel file open. So you don't have to close Excel at all. You can leave it open. And simply flip back over to your Winshuttle window. Over there, you can check your start and end row. So if you put in more than 10 rows of data onto your Excel template, then you should of course change your end row to something bigger than 11. Usually your data starts from row 2, so using start row 2 is fine, but just check that end row is big enough so it will cover all of your data, at least all the data that you want it to cover in your Excel file. So when you start running the script, Winshuttle will start from the start row that you specify here and will go maximum to the end row. If you specify end row 250 right here, but you only have data until row 10, then Winshuttle will see the empty rows after row 10 and notice that there's no more data. When Winshuttle sees 5 consecutive empty rows, it will assume there's no more data and simply stop running the script. So it doesn't matter if your end row is very, very big compared to your actual last data row in Excel. With 5 consecutive empty rows, Winshuttle will stop anyway and just assume there's no more data. So start and end row, those you should check. Number of rows is calculated automatically based on the start and end row, so no need to touch that. Log column is another thing that you might want to check. We did not specify a log column previously in the mapping phase. We could do it there as well, but if we don't, then Winshuttle will do it automatically for us. So at this point, before we do our first run, I would just like to check if log column H in this case is okay for me. So if H is the column that I would like to use for my log messages. If not, I can simply change it there to something else. Or I can just use H as specified. When all these things are fine for me, then I simply click on the Run button. I'm asked for my SAP credentials. If I have selected one of my SAP systems as my default system, then it's not asking for the actual SAP system anymore, but it's simply giving me the SAP password pop up there. So it's simply asking for my username and password. And again, if the remember last logon password option that we talked about before, if that option is on, then it's actually not asking for the password. It's simply giving me the password, and all I have to do is click OK. But if you haven't selected a default system previously, then it's actually asking for you to select the SAP system. So of course you select the system and then give your password and click OK. Then the script runs, and depending on the script and the amount of data that you have in Excel, It might be a matter of 2 seconds, or it might be a matter of even minutes if you have a lot of data and a big script that needs to be run. But after the script has run, we can check our log messages in the Excel file. In this case, what we see is that we have, out of 6 rows of data, we have 5 that were just fine. But our Excel row 4 has an error message on it. And the error message is actually quite simple. It's talking about the base unit to measure where we actually have a value of kx. And it probably should be kg for kilograms, but it's a simple typo, so we have incorrectly typed in kx instead of kg. And the error message now comes up because kx is not a valid value in our SAP system. So we get an error message. If we know what is causing the error message, so it's just a typo in our data, we can simply correct that value and rerun the script. When we rerun the script, of course, in this case, we can simply just click on run and be done with it. What will then happen is that Winshuttle will again go through all of those rows of data and try pushing those values to SAP. Now, for most rows, the values in our Excel template are already the same values that we have in SAP. So there's not an actual change happening. And most likely our script will come back with a message, no changes made, because the data is the same in Excel and in SAP already. In that case, there's no harm done. But I do recommend not to do it like that, but rather to remember to change your run option from run now to run on errors. If I do this run on errors, then what the script will do, it will jump over all of those rows that have a successful log message on them. And the script will only concentrate on those rows in Excel where there is an orange error message. And it will only run those rows, or try to run those rows to SAP. It will save time because it's doing less work. It's concentrating on the ones that we actually want to run and not running all. And like I said before, in this particular case, because we're doing changes in MM02, there's not a real harm done for the data in SAP, even if we run and run and run and rerun the script any number of times with the exact same data. But consider this, our script is actually creating new data in SAP. So let's say new materials are getting created in SAP via our script. If we then run the script again and again and again with the exact same data in Excel, what we might end up with in SAP is many materials with the exact same data. So essentially duplicates. So duplicate materials get created in SAP, unless our SAP system recognizes that they're duplicates and then gives us an error message about that. But that's completely up to the SAP system. Winshuttle doesn't recognize that they're duplicates, and Winshuttle will try and create those duplicates in SAP. So that's, again, one of the reasons why I recommend to use run on errors. When you have already run the script and you have a couple of error messages there, and you only need to run those rows again. So we select run on errors, we click run again, and what we now see in Excel, if everything's fine, then the messages for all the other rows have not changed at all, because they were not processed at all this time. But what we see for the row that used to have an error message on it, it has now a success message. Material was changed. And we also see a light green background for that message, telling us from a huge list of data and a huge list of of log messages that this particular row used to be an error, but it's not anymore. It has been fixed. Previously, I mentioned that whenever we're ready with the testing, we want to, of course, run the script in our production SAP as well. The changing of the SAP system is very, very simple. I mean, each user, when they run a script, they will decide which SAP system they will run it in. So whenever you start your run, you can decide. You can go for the test system, you can go for your quality system, or you can go for your production system, depending on your need. If you have set up your system so that you have a default SAP system, probably one of your test systems as a default for your Winshuttle transaction. Then when you click run, you will get presented with this password window. On the top of that window, Winshuttle will tell you which SAP system we are currently taking connection to. If that system is incorrect and you want to go to a different SAP system, all you have to do is click on the system button and you will get the whole list of your SAP systems. Then just select the one that you want this time, give your password if it's a different password for that system, and you're fine to move on. Alright, next is a demo to run through all of this one more time and make sure that we understand what we're dealing with. Winshuttle transaction here. We'll start creating a new script from the new button. Let's use the same example we had on the slide, so M02. Up top here, I see my SAP system that I'm taking a connection to. That's the correct one. All I do is I give my password and move on. Now we are asked about the recording modes. And for now, we will settle for the recording mode that the Winshuttle is suggesting us. And that is non-batch input mode without SAP controls. On the bottom part here, again, we have some extra information that we can give. What I do advocate for is to change the title. You have to have a title, so Winshuttle will create one for you if you don't want to put it in yourself. But I do advocate for changing it to something more descriptive. When we hit next, we will get an SAP window. And here we are. So we will automatically be in the initial screen of our transaction. Let's give a material number. We will only select basic data 1 as discussed previously. Now it's a matter of putting my cursor into these fields that I want to have in my script and using my keyboard in some way. Description, I will do a slight change in the description, at least just to have some change as well. Let's take base unit of measure as well. So most of these fields, I'm just retyping the data, the values that are already there, just to use my keyboard in some way in each of these fields. So Winshuttle will recognize that these are the fields that I want to use in my script, and I don't want the other ones that I haven't touched. Navigating to Basic Data 2 tab from the drop-down list here, and also recording the basic material field. I can simply use my keyboard in this field as well, or I can also show you the search functionality that we talked about before. So if I click here, I'll get the list of valid values, and I can select my value from there. Winshuttle has enough intelligence behind it to realize that whenever I start clicking buttons like this, I'm actually just doing a quick search for the actual value. So Winshuttle doesn't actually record that portion at all. What Winshuttle records is the actual value that I select for this particular SAP field. So that's the reason why we can actually use these search functionalities as well. So using the search functionalities doesn't really make our script longer and so on. So we can use those even while recording. Again, I don't suggest that you use the searches for all the fields that you use in your for all the fields that you want to record, but for some it is just fine. Exiting from the back button, and of course saving. And now that the SAP window closed, we are brought back to the Winshuttle window. Recording is done. We have the mapping next. I will click on Create Mapping. We should be in the Basic tab here, like this. Again, up top, the SAP fields that I have used in my recording, and on the bottom part, I have the untitled Excel file, so an empty, completely new Excel file. Now it's a matter of dragging and dropping. I want column A to have the material number, so I will put my cursor somewhere in column A and drag it to material number. Mapping type changes, value changes, referring to Excel column A. And on the Excel side, we have a headline and we have the actual value. Let's do this for the rest of these. Like that. So in this example, I thought I would leave base unit of measure as a fixed value, just to show you how it's done. I haven't done any dragging and dropping for it, so it is as it was when I first came into the mapper. So mapping type is as you can see there, fixed value upload, the red pen, and value is PC. For now, let's say that this is our case. We want the base unit of measure always to be PC. So I will leave it as it is. If I needed to change the actual value, so I always want it to be kilograms, for instance, then I would double click there in the value field and actually just change the value to whatever I needed it to be, for instance, kilograms. But for now, PC is fine for me. PC is the one that I want it always to be. So fixed value upload means, again, that whatever material I'm dealing with this script, when the script runs for whatever material, base unit of measure will always be changed to PC. It doesn't matter what value we have in SAP at that moment. When we run the script, it will change base unit of measure to PC. If that's what we want to accomplish, then this is fine. I'm happy with my drag and drop. I will close mapping from here, and I get prompted to save my files. First, my Excel file, because it's an untitled one. And then my script. I will give it the same name, like that. Mapping is done. There's update mapping, which I can use to go back and redo change whatever I need to. But most of my window is reserved for the running portion. So of course, first test runs and then actual production runs if we are happy with the script. Let's first take a look at all these options here before we start looking at our Excel file. So start and end row. We can even change the start row if you want to run rows 100 to 200 in our Excel file. That's fine. The Winshuttle default ones are 2 and 11 as start and end row. Very often when you have tested your script enough times and you want to allow the use in production as well, you might want to change at least your end row to something bigger than 11. But again, it's not mandatory. Every time you run a script, you can check your start and end row. Log column, G. I think G is fine. We can check it when we see our Excel file in just a minute. Here in run options, we have different options. We now have talked about run now and run on errors. So we'll stick with those and we'll cover the other ones in later portions of our trainings. Run reason above that here is just free text. So if you want to give a run reason as free text, you can type in whatever you want. I know that some users like to use it because it gets logged in with your run. So if someone is looking at the logs, what was run and what was done, they will also see the run reason. And then of course there's the run button. My system says test. Don't get confused with that. Yours will most likely just say run all the time. My system here has a little bit different setup. So I will get two types of buttons depending on if it's ready to be run in production or not. So right now this is just for testing purposes, so my button says test, and then with a different script the same button might say run for me. That would mean that I'm able to run it in a production environment. But most of you, the button will always say run, and you can yourself decide whether to run it in a testing environment or in a production environment. So this is the button that I refer to whenever I say the run button. And for me, it doesn't matter if it says test or run. All right, let's open our Excel file. It's blinking away here. Okay, we need a little bit more test data. All right, that's enough testing data for us to see whether this works or not. Okay, this is enough for our testing data for now, just to do our first test run to see if the script works as we intended it to. I will save my Excel file just to be on the safe side. Again, not completely mandatory, but I do advocate for saving your data at this point. No need to close down my Excel file. I can simply leave it open and flip back over to Winshuttle and start the run from here. Check which SAP system you're connecting into. That's fine. And wait for the run to complete. You can follow the progress here on the bottom left-hand corner if you wish. All right, over here on the bottom it says finish, time taken 11 seconds to run 3 out of 4 transactions. If we look at Excel, we will notice that there's one error message. 3 were just fine. The data went through to SAP as expected, but 1 got an error message. Okay, it's the same typo we had on the slides. We will change that. Again, I'm a control freak, so I want to save my data at this point as well. But it's not technically mandatory. Leave my Excel file open, flip back over to Winshuttle, and do run on errors. Now the run has finished, and our Excel file looks just fine. The row that used to be with an error message has now a success message on it, and there's a light green background, just to make a difference between that and the other ones that were already finished successfully previously. That concludes the first part of our basic package for Winshuttle transaction. Please join me in the next part, which will cover problem investigation, so what to do when your script brings back error messages from SAP. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining.